Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome to my overview of Ecosystem. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. It's the Steam refund window. Steam reckons you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time. And broadly speaking, as a rule, I would agree and say that 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short, punchy video, broad strokes info, keep it around 10 minutes, and then you can make up your mind on your own. Okay, so this is a really interesting, fascinating game. It's gone 1.0. I covered it a fair bit back in early access, so I've put a few hours into it, and I would say it's something that could be recommended under specific caveat, and without, going down the whole rabbit hole of what makes a game a game. The actual game systems in this are limited. It's very much an interesting concept, rendered incredibly well in a sandbox, and I have a huge bias towards it because a lot of it is dealing with things like genetic algorithms, evolution, that sort of stuff. So yeah, personally, I haven't touched it since it first came out in early access, and it's still awesome in all the ways that I remember. But, if you held my feet to the fire and said what's really different about it in 1.0, I couldn't really tell you. Anyway, so what is this game? Ultimately, it is a sandbox. You pick a biome and they sort of just random generate a bit of just a flat, bland play space in the ocean. And ultimately, your objective, the game, as it were, is to generate these sort of like research points, which create this feedback loop where you can spend them to buy in a roguelike booster pack kind of fashion. It'll give you like 3 choices of plants or whatever, just general things that you can buy, which in turn you cash in to buy that option, and now you have the ability to buy, new seaweed or starfish or something, right? And the idea is that you build out these little ecosystems, which in turn will start to generate more points as the system kind of runs itself, propagates. It's very much a chaotic systems-based world that interacts with each other. And that's about it. Now, what it's doing there is brilliant, right? Hats off to the developer for realizing this. It's at the base level, it starts out, literally you can place down 1 or 2 plants and you can watch their little seeds pop out and propagate further out, and they all kind of combat for different space and conditions, and some can die out and some can grow like weeds, just depending if you've set the right conditions for them. But as that biodiversity goes up, you can start inserting things like forager type fish, and you can get right into it if you really want. So it very much has all those tools of someone who's sandbox interested. You can custom make wildlife with different features and this, that, and the other, and that doesn't really interest me so much as the systems-based evolution that's going on behind the curtain. So generally speaking, you'll just put down a species and it will just randomly generate their kind of starting conditions, and they flog around and they're driven by a neural network individual to the species, but there's also mutation as well. So the individual fish has the ability to kind of spin off, a la like the idea of general genetic algorithm systems with a mutation splash in there. And so their first hurdle is being able to move, and they're just, obviously randomly generated. So you're going to have a lot of dudes that flog around and gyrate and just horrible nightmare fuel things that don't do anything. But then every now and again, you will have a version that will have essentially improved fitness. This is a whole thing you could go down the rabbit hole in, and I'm not purporting to be an expert, but you could call it a hobby of mine. I've always found this stuff fascinating. But generally speaking, that's the idea, is you're throwing things at the wall, there's a mutation component, there's a fitness component, and they will evolve on a very, very fast time scale. And you get some really fascinating stuff coming out of that. Fish with all sorts of different limbs and fins, and as you go further along and unlock more research points, you unlock sort of more complex versions, right? The game has threatened me with tentacles and stuff like that in tooltips, but I've unlocked kind of stingrays and blowfish and whale type creatures, and then predators, which don't necessarily interact with the, plankton or bloody corals and seaweeds that you place down. They're more about eating and attacking other fish that have evolved in there. So it creates this whole ecosystem, would you believe it? And it's fascinating. I've been very, very clear when it comes to games, I really start to lose interest with sandbox type games. I need an objective. I know I'm not the only one. If I really wanted my creative spirit to run free, I probably wouldn't do it in a video game. Personally, I'd be on like an easel with paint, being the next Picasso or something like that, but I'm not so inclined. However, this game still holds my attention. But again, it's not necessarily because I'm creatively interacting with the sandbox. In a way, it almost strays a little bit closer to an idler for me, and I just find watching the simulation very fascinating. So you can nudge it, you can poke it, you can pick favorable species, and you can kind of make them immune to dying out, because they will die. You know, once they overcome being able to swim, they have to mate, they have to eat, and they get more complex. I've had some sending out like sonar songs you can hear, and you know, I saw a bunch of things schooling together as well, so they bred up into a like 30 fish nightmare fuel blob that stuck together. So I just think it's incredibly fascinating. It's going to blow your computer up as well. At a certain point, even in these 2 hours looking at it, I managed to get down to single digit frames. So yeah, I suppose it's one of those things, and I'm not trying to bash it or anything like that, but also, as much as I find it fascinating, and a part of me could just kind of sit there and engage with the very rudimentary gameplay mechanics and just revel in this really cool system and, you know, click on individual neural networks and see them firing off and just really marvel at the technical mastery that's going on here. It's such a really cool concept, except it's missing that next step where it becomes essentially a game. I don't believe it has achievements or anything like that. Not that that's a huge deal breaker or anything, but generally speaking, I expect most full release games would have achievements. But even the fact that I'm bringing that up sort of points to the larger problem, is that like I am looking for a gameplay loop or a hook other than make up your own fun, because that's the sandbox cop-out, which I'm not really interested in. So if you want to see a really awesome model of essentially genetic algorithm driven ecosystem under the ocean kind of stuff, where you've got all different environs interacting with each other, you've also got a hierarchy of predators and alpha predators, and also like part of me does want to put more hours into essentially letting the simulation run, because once you get to a point, if you do run out of research points and you want to push out to unlock more, you just move to another blank spot, you dump down all your plants, all your everything, and you just let it go buck wild. And that's as complex as the strategy gets. I'm sure you can sculpt and craft, and maybe it does get more trickier on the high end, but the game has had a lot of time with me to make a strong first impression as to how I want to spend my downtime gaming. And short of running the simulation for X hours just to see how complex these fish and things get, like I said, that would be just more of an act of curiosity as opposed to full-blown engagement and being hooked on the game. So yeah, I hear myself as I say all this stuff. I guess I'm coming out negative, but even though I'm very favorable, very partial, biased even towards what's going on here, and I think it's really wonderfully done, yet I still can't change the core tenet of my interest in gaming, which is kind of got to be a game first. So yeah, mixed recommendation. Again, it's not black and white. I hope I've given you enough information so you are armed going forth. Maybe this is exactly what you want, something that you can kind of just zone out to and poke and prod and you know, encourage a certain ugly fish that you become attached to, maybe encourage his species along the evolutionary track, make up your own fun as it were. But you know, also it is a cautionary warning. Be aware going in that it is very much going to be limited by your ability or interest in kind of making your own creative goals as far as engaging with the game further beyond what is initially offered as a rudimentary gameplay loop. Anyway, these are my thoughts. Team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.